Fab, and welcome to those of you who are watching this back later. So just a really quick run through of who we are. Hope for the Future are a charity. We're based in Sheffield, but we work across all of the UK, and we specifically support people to use democratic engagement as a tool in arguing about the climate and nature crisis and pushing for more ambitious action for people and for planet through training and support to make sure that people feel like talking to their local politicians is an approachable thing and something that they feel like they can do effectively. Um, I just we're delivering these trainings, as I mentioned, in partnership with Climate Cymru. And Ben, I don't know if you want to come in and just explain a little bit about the wider project and Climate Cymru itself, which I'm sure many of you will already be familiar with. Oh, you're muted, Ben, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much, Alfie. Hi again, everyone. My name is Benjamin. I work for Climate Cymru, mainly as the Ethnic Minorities Network Coordinator. So, Climate Cymru is a movement of more than 400 organizations in Wales, and we come together we come together understanding the urgency in terms of climate and nature crisis that we do have, and we work together trying to help communities on the ground to answer that. So we are working with Hope for the Future on this project, supporting hustings events happening on the ground in different locations. At the moment, we are working in 5 locations, including one hosting that will be happening in Cardigan, another one in Cardiff, Newport, North Wales, Bangor, we're targeting Bangor, and another one in Swansea. The hustings we are working on are non-partisan. We do not support any parties, but we just create a dedicated space where communities and people can talk to their candidates on the ground and understand or ask the questions about climate or how the plan that candidates might have on, in regards to those sectors. But these hustings are just also opportunities for people on the ground to talk about things that matter to them. So it's possible that during these hustings, people might ask other questions related to their day-to-day life. And of course, this is also something we think it's important. So briefly, this is the projects we are working on, and this is what Climate Cymru is. I don't know if we need more details at this point, Alfie, or if that's enough.
No, that's amazing, Ben. Thank you. And yeah,
Okay,
if anyone's
yeah,
got any questions on that, we can come to them too.
okay, sure.
Um,
Thank you.
but yeah, it's a really exciting project to be a part of, and we're really looking forward to those hustings and hopefully to the ones that people who are joining today might go on to run. Just to let you know what we're going to go through today, we're going to talk a little bit about what a hustings is. Some of you may have been running hustings for many years. Some of you may be approaching this form of kind of political engagement for the first time. So just want to make sure we're all on the same page on what they are and why we think they're an effective democratic tool. And then we'll keen to hear from you guys as well about what you're looking forward to or concerned about or lessons you have from previous hustings as well. And then we're going to break this down into kind of 3 main sections. So things that we encourage people to do before hustings, things that are really key to an effective hustings on the day, and then things that can kind of maximize the impact of our hustings long term. So thinking about steps we can take after a husting. And then, as I said, we'll have some time for questions. It's a 90-minute session today, so we have popped a comfort break in there that might ebb and flow slightly depending on timings, but the aim is to give you guys at least time to run and get a cup of tea or something like that. And so with that, I'll hand over to Cyril to walk you through what hustings is and why we think they're an important tool.
Thank you, Alfie, and good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. I'm Cyril. I'm based in Manchester. Yeah, Alfie, if we can just go on to the next slide, please. And again, with everyone, we understand that maybe some of you in the room might have conducted or organized hustings before, but just to ensure that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet, we just wanted to base our knowledge from the ground up. So hustings is an event, online or in person, where candidates for a constituency are invited to share their views on issues and answer questions about their beliefs, approaches, and policy ideas. We just see it as a way of enhancing democratic engagement within local areas. And then in terms of what exactly our belief is in terms of like hustings being an effective tool, which will move us into the next slides. We see them as a feature of democratic engagement and democratic enhancement, in that it allows constituents, people like yourselves and me, to make informed decisions at the ballot box, because we are hearing directly from local candidates in terms of like what it is that they're standing on, what it is that they are passionate about, and what are their key motivations in running for office. So with that, it allows candidates to hear our priorities as well as constituents, which can sometimes change stances, right? So again, by them hearing from us, we're able to change the narrative, as they'll be able to go back to their party bosses and say, listen, this is what I'm hearing on the ground. And this is ever so important, as well as we're moving into a new Senate proportional representative system, right, which we will touch on later on this call. But fundamentally, they create opportunities for accountability with candidates, and parties will go on to be elected, right? It's always good to remember, or to remind a politician, like, remember when you came to my hustings, it was a church gathering, you say this to us, right? But right now you're doing X, right? Can you please tell me like what has changed within that? But and again, as Alfie mentioned, in terms of like our Hope for the Future's approach, we really do believe in a relational model, that your relationship with the politician is ongoing, right? And it's always good to have a basis of understanding. And hustings will afford that. But at best, they bring together communities and are an example of how to do respectful, collaborative political discourse, right? Especially in this age as well, where we're living in a polarized environment, it's always critical to have a resting place, right? Or to have some guardrails in which everyone can come and coalesce around. So with that, as Alfie mentioned before as well, we've tried to make this session as interactive as possible. And before we delve any further into the call, we just wanted to hear from you in terms of whether you've organized or attended any candidate hustings, and trying to understand really as to how it went. But before I do that, before we delve into this and open the floor over to you, I'll pause the recording for now, because we want this to be a nice, safe space in which we can all share learnings and share experiences as well. So for those that are joining us online, we will pause the recording for now, and we'll come back to you shortly. So if you bear with.
Fab. Thanks, Cyril. Great. So really great to hear those thoughts. So yeah, what we're going to do now is kind of just run through some kind of top tips that we've found from hustings that we've organized and attended and worked on. And these are, these work in climate and nature hustings, but as Ben said, there's going to be hustings that are just about the kind of local community and the priorities of people too. And the skills that we're talking about today apply across kind of key local issues too. Organizing hustings, we don't want to make it sound like a daunting thing, but there is some kind of stuff that needs to happen beforehand to make sure that hustings is really effective. And some of that is changing because of the new electoral system. And so we're just going to run through kind of 5 really key steps that we think are important. I'm going to talk more about this later, but it's worth saying, as I mentioned last week, that we have developed a toolkit which is now live, which has everything we're going to talk about tonight and a whole bunch more stuff, which we will make sure that you've got a copy of too. So the first really important decision is deciding kind of how you're going to host your hustings, if it's going to be online or in person, or if it's going to be hybrid. A lot of hustings moved online during COVID, and there's some real benefit to doing stuff online. There's also a lot to be said for having people in a physical space in the community. So both have kind of pros and cons. If you do decide to do an in-person event in particular, we think it's really important that you're considering accessibility from the kind of get-go. How is that venue a place that's accessible for both attendees and candidates across your community? Is it somewhere that's easy to get to in the local area, both from like a public transport perspective and kind of a prominence perspective, being somewhere that people can easily get to at the time you choose to host it? And does it have kind of the suitable provisions you'll need? So a physical space that is large enough, but also a space for politicians or candidates to be before or after the hustings, and enough space for both the people who are attending and potentially press and journalism if you choose to have them in the room. So picking a venue is really, really crucial. And often kind of one of the first steps in doing these hustings, especially if you're doing it in person. The next thing that we think is really important is to decide whether or not your hustings is going to have a theme. We're not saying it needs to, but it's really useful to know if you're going to have that, because you want to make that clear to attendees and to candidates who come along from the kind of get-go, really. Is this a husting that is focusing on climate and nature? Is it focusing on a specific issue within climate and nature? Or is it more just about the priorities and interests of the local community? And just that clarity can be really helpful. It helps candidates to think about how they want to prep for the husting, and it helps attendees think about the sorts of questions they want to ask too. So it's worth considering, especially if there's an issue or kind of a particular issue that you think is really important locally in this election. So always worth considering. But if you do decide to go for climate, nature, and husting, like always, that doesn't mean that has to exclude other things. There's so many intersections with climate and nature, whether that's kind of health or economy. So they can still be involved, but that clarity can be really useful, we find. The next one is inviting candidates, and this is where things are probably changing the most, or the most distinct from if you were having a MP husting or a council husting. The way people are going to vote on election day now is that they, as I'm sure you all know, you're going to get given one vote and you will vote for a party rather than individual candidates, and then candidates will then be selected based on the vote share the parties receive. What that means, and because each party can field up to 8 candidates for the 6 slots per constituency, there's going to be, in some places, in excess of 50 candidates, and you can't have 50 candidates at a hustings. It's just not effective. So what we're encouraging people to do is to try and have every party invited, but not to invite every candidate, trying to have one candidate per party. And it's a slightly more challenging role for candidates in that hosting environment because they are representing their own views, but they're also representing the views of their party. But that's the kind of approach we're encouraging people to go with. Unfortunately, the kind of deadline for candidate lists to be published is really late this year. It's the 9th of April. In a lot of constituencies, particularly large parties, have already published their lists, but in a lot of places, we're still waiting on candidates too. So in those situations, if you're trying to invite people along already because you want to get the ball rolling, what we're encouraging people to do is to reach out directly to the party. Say that you're hosting a hustings, you would like a member from their party to be present, and ask them to pick one of their candidates and get back in touch with you. Some parties are not actually fielding contact information for individual candidates. At this constituency, they're just providing contact details for the local party branch. And so you can go through there. But if there is a candidate that you particularly want, or you have a pre-existing relationship with, they may be one of the MSs that already exist, or you may know them from their work as a councillor or in the local community, feel free to reach out to them too, and for them to be that party representative. So that's the kind of crucial distinction. The other thing to explain is that there's kind of 2 types of hustings that communities can run in a pre-election period. That's a selective and a non-selective hustings. A non-selective means that you invite every party that's standing in the region or the constituency to come. Doesn't mean they all come, and it's not your responsibility if they don't reply or they choose not to attend. That's not your responsibility, but it does mean they've all been invited, unless you have really clear impartial reasons for not inviting a particular candidate or a particular party. Selective hustings are ones that could kind of reasonably be seen, or the Electoral Commission defines them as, could reasonably be seen as trying to encourage people to vote a certain way. And they're much more complicated. They're trickier to organise. They have certain kind of rules and regulations around them. And they, especially in a pre-election period, are more tricky to do. So our advice would be, as community hustings, to run a non-selective hustings where you invite all parties that are running in the local election. We can talk about some concerns or challenges people might have with doing that as we go on, but that would be kind of our recommendation. The last thing to think about is how you get people into the room for the hustings. Ultimately, the more attendees you can have from your local community, the better. It's a great question, Jonathan. Are a form of security concern? I think there's an argument to be made there that they could be, and that is listed as a reason to not invite a particular party. So that's a decision individual organisers will have to make based on the community they're representing and what they think is likely in the local area. So it's definitely something you could consider. Our advice would still be to invite at least a candidate from that party to give them an opportunity to say what they think and let people make a decision on whether they think they are worth not electing in their local community. But it's definitely there's a legitimate argument to make there, I think. So yeah, in terms of kind of promotion, it's a really key part of getting that message out there. Obviously, if you're with a local organization or you're representing a national organization such as Greenpeace, you might be able to access those kind of networks and share things throughout Facebook and WhatsApp and email and so on. If you're running this kind of as a smaller group or maybe don't have that kind of network across social media, there's still other things you can do. Physical advertising is still, I think, really compelling for hustings, whether that's kind of flyers in local religious buildings or community spaces. And then the other one that I think is worth mentioning is press, and how you can engage with press to kind of amplify the impact of your hustings. And we would encourage you, if you are interested in having some form of press at the hustings, to reach out to them at the same time that you're reaching out to candidates, to give them as much time as possible to liaise with you, hopefully have a reporter there on the day, and that we think that's a really powerful additional tool. And it can sometimes kind of, particularly if a candidate decides not to attend or does attend and says something controversial or potentially really positive, having a reporter there to kind of say what's happened to the larger audience can be really useful. A tip for this is if you don't really have any connections with local press but are keen to invite someone, a lot of newspapers will have what they call a local democracy reporter or words to that effect, and they're often the sort of person who would report on hustings. There's lots of other things you can do with event promotion too. I think a really crucial thing to consider is making sure people know how they register for the event. Do they need to sign up online in advance? Can they just rock up on the day? There's pros and cons to both, but with registering, you know who's going to be there on the day. It's easier to communicate with people and you have a better estimation of attendance. So we would encourage some form of registration, but you may want it just to be an open venue place for people to attend. Those are some kind of top line tips on event promotion, but I was just wondering if anyone's got any other suggestions or recommendations that have been effective in hustings past, whether attending or promoting. But if not, we'll move on. That's fab. And then the last one to talk about that is a shame, but is a reality, is that you need to consider the kind of security of both your attendees and candidates, and making sure that you've done what you can to keep those people safe is a real priority of being an organizer. Ourselves and lots of others in Wales and across the UK are more concerned that hustings that have a climate and nature focus this year are more likely to be disrupted by kind of anti-climate voices, which is a shame. The risk we still think is fairly low, but there is kind of a possibility of that. So it's just a flag that we really encourage people to consider that kind of reality and what they can have in place to mitigate those risks potentially. For larger hustings that are maybe more high profile, that might be considering having security if it's a physical in-person hustings, or talking with local law enforcement about the hustings so that they can be supporting with kind of practical advice. If that's online, it might be having processes to make sure people, if they're being disruptive in the call, can be removed, so on and so forth. But just encouraging people to think of, as they would with many of the other risks of hosting an event, also thinking about that security risk for both attendees and candidates. So those are kind of five things we think are really important to do beforehand. But there's also a bunch of stuff that happens on the day that is really crucial, which I'll hand over to Cyril to talk about.
Cool. Just a quick one, Arthur. Do you want to have a break now, or shall we push on?
I think maybe we push on for a little bit longer and break around maybe quarter past 7 or so. How does that
Okay,
sound?
cool.
I'm not sure if I can last that long. I might have to pop out now, but you carry on and I'll pop
No,
back.
that's fine. We can break now then. That's not a problem.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Why don't we do 5 minutes now and come back at 7:05? Does that work for everyone? Amazing. Great. And then we'll
Thank you.
dive straight into running the hustings. Fab.
Thank you.
Good stuff. I'll wait for the recordings. Welcome back to those that are joining us online. We were not going to touch on running your hustings and what to do on the day. So you've done all the grand stuff that Alfie spoke about in terms of securing the venue, securing the parties or the candidates, and then you've also looked after your safety and security as well. So now you've done all the heavy lifting. It is now the day of the hustings. So we believe there are certain things that need to happen to make for an effective hustings on that particular day. And Philippa has already touched on this as well, but I think it's actually quite important to draw out for this particular session, and especially if we've never done one ourselves as well. So it's all about choosing a great chair, right? And a great chair is like the coach, right? So the decision maker was able to get things moving swiftly on. It's like that MC. We've all been to a wedding, and for those that have gone to some certain weddings, we're like, that MC is actually quite good. It's keeping things on time, keeping everyone pointing in the right direction, looking at the bride and groom, and a great chair is something is along those lines. We can think of them as a great MC, but fundamentally, they are pivotal to having success on the particular day. So, what should you be looking out for in a particular chair? Right, there are certain characteristics that make for a great chair, and it is about them being politically neutral, right? And of course, some of these hustings that we're doing, they might be on a particular theme, but nonetheless, given that we're having different parties coming along, it is important for the chair to be politically neutral. They can't have any of their biases being shown, right? Either in the way they answer the questions or structure the questions, or who they are choosing to speak, right? So it's very much important that they are politically neutral. And within that, they have to set a good they have to be good at setting the atmosphere. And this is about trying to read the room as well, trying to ensure that they're able to ensure that the politicians themselves or the candidates themselves feel safe and feel that they can be heard or listened to, and equally as well that the crowd as well is taking part in the process in the most collaborative manner as well. So with that as well, they have to ensure that everyone speaks, right? They have to be fair in terms of who they choose, and within that as well, it's very much important that you have a certain agenda with timings, right? And then this is shared alongside, this is shared to all the candidates ahead of time as well. Everyone should have enough time to speak as well, and this goes for the audience as well. If an audience member, for example, is rumbling and the question is taking forever, it is up to the chair to ensure that they keep that person to task, or they're able to summarize in terms of the question so that the panel can understand and answer clearly as well. So with that as well, they have to be effective at timekeeping, right? As much as we love organizing hustings, during the election season, candidates or parties tend to be very, very busy, and having them in your room is a massive, amazing feat of achievement. But nonetheless, we also have to respect their time as well in terms of like how taking time out of the day, campaigning to come and sit and meet with the community. And nonetheless, as well, you also have people within the audience as well who have got other priorities or other commitments in their lives. So therefore, it's important that we keep to time. Right. And again, if you're sharing the agenda ahead of time or ahead of the hustings, you'll be able to pinpoint exactly where it is that the hustings will be coming to an end. Thereby, it's important to keep to time. And then in terms of inclusivity as well, this is a big one. We should all think about who we're attending in our hustings, be it the parties, but also the audience as well. But also think about where the conversations or where the questions are coming from, right? And again, the ideas of a people's assembly, right, is a good way of ensuring that there's a democratic nature or democratic principles that are running through that, in terms of like we're able to pinpoint certain, or rather we're able to get in all the questions that we want to put to the candidates in an inclusive manner, that everyone within that community, regardless of race, creed, religion, they're able to feel that they've been part of a successful event. But fundamentally, in a nutshell, political neutrality of the chair allows all candidates an equal chance to speak. It encourages questions from a diverse range of audience members. So quite a lot for the chair to cover. And then just maybe finally as well, just to run through like the last bits of the characteristics of a chair. And I've already covered most of this as well, but just one thing that will need to be pointed out, especially like given the political environment that we're in, is that chairs should also be ready to deal promptly and professionally with any disruptions at the event, right? And this is all about ensuring that people feel safe, the participants or the candidates, but also the audience members as well. But fundamentally, it is about being able to set the tone of the event and emphasizing inclusivity and fairness as well. Like, we do not want to fall foul of the hustings rules. Now, given that these elections, these hustings are taking place all over Wales, not every candidate, for example, will be able to speak Welsh or be bilingual. So there are certain things that we need to just to pinpoint on this front. And these considerations on bilingualism are about trying to ensure that there is extra time for opening and closing speeches for candidates that speak Welsh and English, right? So, for example, if you allocate 3 minutes for all the candidates to introduce themselves, you also have to allocate 3 minutes for the Welsh or for the bilingual candidate as well. So they'll get 3 minutes in English and 3 minutes in Welsh as well. But it's very much important that you do put this into consideration as well, rather that this is part and parcel of your event. You don't want to fall foul of this. But fundamentally as well, do you consider translating any material that you might have in your event? And I believe Climate Camera does have a team that can help with translation, but I can be corrected on this as well. But do make sure that we consider bilingualism in our hustings as well. So with that, there is also an element of establishing expectations with speakers, right? So as mentioned before, we want to set clear boundaries for how long candidates will be able to get to speak, right? So if you only speak English, you get 3 minutes, for example, for your opening line, but 6 minutes if you are bilingual. But again, it's important that we're setting these expectations from speakers. It makes the job easier. It makes the day run smoother as well. And do remind candidates that the chair will interrupt them if they deviate from these guidelines, right? So it's important that these guidelines are shared well in advance of the hustings as well. But again, for the hustings, for the politicians themselves, it's important that they are reminded that hustings is a chance to hear from the community and to help the community to make an informed democratic choice. Again, something that we are very much hot on here at Hope for the Future. And moving on to the next slide as well, we have to ensure that everyone is aware of the running order and when they'll get a chance to contribute, right? Again, coming back to that element of honoring the democratic elements of this in terms of like being able to hear from the community, right? So it's important for people to know exactly when they do come in. And again, this comes back to the onus on the chair that they should remind the attendees that they shouldn't interrupt speakers and should respect the variety of viewpoints expressed. And again, coming back to that question, right, in terms of our reform and security concern, from our side of things, we do believe that it's important to invite all the other parties, and within that as well, there is a certain element in that we have to be respectful of different views, right? And it's not that all the parties as well will agree to it as well. Yes, we are supposed to be seeing the slides, Philippa. Yes. Are you not able to see the slides? get a thumbs up from Jonathan. You're not able to see the slides, Philippa. I see you. No.
I can't see any slides.
Oh, okay. Not sure. Like Sean and Jonathan, you can see the slides, right? Okay.
Okay.
I don't know.
Don't worry. I can see them on the, when we get them through the post.
Okay. Apologies for that. Maybe Alfie, do you know how we can, if that's an issue that we can sort out?
Yeah,
from our
let me stop sharing and reshare and see if that makes a difference.
Sure thing.
Bear with me 1 second. Sorry about that, Philippa. Let's see that.
Oh, yeah, I can see them.
Cool.
Well, yeah, see it
And
now.
can everyone else see them as well?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
Sorry about
Great.
that.
Awesome. And again, welcome back, everyone. Right. So the other thing as well, just to point out is clapping, right, or not clapping. It can be an effective democratic tool in terms of like if someone has said a very good point, or a member of the party has said a certain good point, and the audience agrees with that. We are all allowed to clap, but again, it's entirely up to the hostings organizers yourselves in terms of like how do you want to approach that. But we think, for example, that this is something that is unique in itself. So with that, I'm gonna pause here, and I will pass over to Alfie to lead us through the questions. We just wanted to share a few certain things as well. Alfie, over to you, buddy.
Thanks, Cyril. So arguably the most important part of a hustings, once you've got an effective chair and all the things we've talked about so far, is having effective questions that lead to answers from politicians that help to inform attendees on their kind of views and their stances, help create conversation, and ultimately, allow hustings to be an effective transfer of information between constituents and candidates. There are just loads of ways you can run a hustings and you can structure the question format. I'm just going to run through 5 that we think are pretty useful. One of them Philip has already talked about, but there's a whole different variety of approaches, and they all kind of have kind of advantages and disadvantages, and these are all explained in much more kind of detail in our toolkit too. There's fully live questions where the chair is only really responsible for making sure candidates answer questions, but there'll be a microphone passed around, or if it's online, people put their hands up and just ask whatever question they want. In some ways, that's the most direct form of husting, but directly between the constituent and the candidate. The challenge is that when you give that microphone to a constituent, they might take the mic and talk for a really long time, or they might go off on a ramble, or it can become a little bit more tricky to manage. Pre-submitted questions is another one people go for, where when people are registering or a small time afterwards, you get in touch with them and ask them to submit questions in advance, which the chair will then, or the organisers will then go through and kind of group by theme and question and pull together a selection that kind of represent the diversity of questions submitted. And that means that the audience is still in control of the questions that are being asked, but they're not happening so much on the night. And sometimes in that situation, the questions are also shared with the politicians in advance, which allows them to come with a more kind of structured answer, which some people like and some people think kind of takes away from the spontaneity. So different approaches for different environments. Moderated live questions is becoming increasingly common. And this is where, using kind of an online tool such as Slido or something else, the audience will submit questions online live, and the chair will pull out questions from the audience then. The benefit of a tool like Slido is that when someone submits a question, other people in the audience can like that question. And so the questions that are the most kind of popular kind of rise to the top, and it's a way of voting on the questions that end up being used. So that's growing in kind of popularity for in-person or hybrid sessions particularly. Small group deliberation is what Philippa was talking about, where the community, the attendees have a chance to discuss and come up with questions as their groups and take them to the politicians. I think it's a really, really effective way of having a conversation. It does have a higher time commitment for attendees because they've got to give a bit more time to put those questions together, but really cool nonetheless. And then the last one is kind of less traditional, but is called sort of conversational audience participation. And these are less common, but in situations like this, the audience would split up into groups, and rather than all the candidates sitting at the front and answering question kind of one by one, the candidates would actually move around the different groups over an allotted period of time. So they might be 5 candidates, the room would split into 5 groups, and each of those groups would get 10 or 15 minutes with each candidate to have a conversation with them and ask them some questions. And that's really kind of can be quite more interesting for sort of building relationships and having a more informal conversation. But it can often be dominated by a few more confident voices and doesn't give you the opportunity to hear all the politicians answer one question publicly. What a lot of people will end up doing is a combination of 2 or 3 of these approaches. So they might have a time for pre-submitted questions and then a period of time for live questions or moderated live questions. They might have a small group deliberation that supports the chair asking some questions, so on and so forth. We're not saying there's kind of a right or wrong way, just that there's lots of different ways to do that. But kind of regardless of which approach you do go for, we think there's some really useful things you can do to ask compelling questions. And I'm just going to run through kind of three of those. The first is to ground your questions in research and lived experience, whether that's kind of relevant local statistics, anecdotes of your experience with the issue you're talking about. And that just kind of sets the start for the conversation. It shows why you think it matters. It implies why you think it should matter to the politicians or the candidates rather. And it gives an opportunity to kind of establish just a sort of an area of agreement because you're starting with a statistic or a lived experience, which even if the politician doesn't want to resolve the issue or isn't pro-climate or whatever it may be, can't disagree with the reality of the statistic or your experience. So there's an example there which says government data shows 40% of households in our constituency are in fuel poverty, which is far above the national average, and then includes a story of knowing firsthand how difficult it can be affording the cost of heating in the winter. So that's an example of grounding your question in both statistic and personal experience. The second kind of bit of the sandwich that I'm now deciding I'm building as a question is really emphasizing why it matters to you and why it should matter to other people. And if possible, bringing in that kind of intersectionality that we talked about with climate and nature and a whole bunch of other issues. So in this example, talking about air pollution, but connecting it directly to people's health, the local economy, and things such as that. It's also a really useful way of showing why the issue matters based on the priorities politicians have claimed to have. These won't be the same. These aren't always the same across all parties, but for example, pretty much every political party would say improving the local economy was a priority. And so just connecting your issue to what you perceive to be the priorities of the candidates in front of you can be quite compelling. And then the final bit, once you've done that kind of preamble, as it were, is making a really, really clear question that is, it's clear what you're asking the politician. It's easy for them to answer. It's not necessarily a yes or no question because that's quite short. You want to give them a chance to explain why they think, how they think about that issue and why. But you want it to be clear. And hopefully with a good chair as well, asking a clear question allows the chair to push back gently if politicians seem to be avoiding the question or going down I've forgotten the word, but going down an alleyway. So that's something that's really useful. And I think the other thing to consider here is how the question you're asking creates accountability in the way that a candidate answers it. So in these examples here, how will your work as RMS, if elected, support active travel? Gives the politicians a chance to share their kind of interests and thoughts and a variety of answers. But it also means what they share, you can write down, note, and if they are elected, remind them of what they said they would do on active travel, for example. So that's an example of kind of that element there. And again, we think they're important whether people are kind of asking questions in advance or on the night. You might be thinking of being the actual chair of your event or just helping to organize. But it can be really useful for the chair as well to have some questions for them to help start the conversation. particularly for those sort of opening or closing remarks. And these are really, we encourage these to be sort of like wide open questions that are, again, politically neutral. So there's some examples there. What do you think the most important issue is in our constituency? What would you do to tackle the climate and nature crisis? Why do you believe as a candidate or as a party you're best placed to represent this constituency? Questions like that give candidates an opportunity to try and stand out, but also share their thoughts and feelings in a slightly more wide way. Our general advice would be when asking a question for it to not be longer than a minute. Any longer than a minute, and you're probably not only asking one question, or people have probably already forgotten elements of the beginning. And that's not because what you have to say or what other people have to say isn't important. It just allows the conversation to move on quickly and to get an answer to that specific question. And that's definitely a challenge, but really useful. Just a couple of things to avoid when developing questions. Some people might go to a hustings with a real bone to pick with a particular party or candidate, and that's sometimes tricky to navigate. But it's not hugely useful in a hustings environment, we find, because if you're asking a question to a specific party, the other candidates either can't answer very well, or their answer is just going to be to criticize that party rather than share what they would do. And they'll very quickly jump on the, yeah, actually, Labour's record on environment is really poor, or whatever it might be. So we'd encourage you not to reference a specific party unless you're kind of saying, emphasising the diversity of view across the panel. Try not to be too accusationary in questions. Trying to ask open questions that allow positive answers. When politicians get defensive and flustered in a hustings, they don't always give the most useful answers to the community that they're claiming to serve. So it's a fine balance between kind of holding people to account and not sounding too accusationary. And then a kind of overly technical questions. Some people love asking a question to try and catch a politician out. Can you tell me the exact percentage of X, Y, and Z? And they're really gratifying and really satisfying when a politician can't answer sometimes. But again, they're not actually hugely useful in learning what they actually think about the issue more widely. So encourage simplicity of language and not focusing so much on questions that are about tell me this exact statistic or what happened this exact moment. Or if you are doing that, having a really good understanding of why you think that's helpful in that hustings environment. So that's kind of questions. I think I'm going to hand back to you, Cyril, actually, here, if that's okay, to take the last section. Oh, no, I will finish this section. Apologies. Sorry, I got lost on my timings there. Just a couple of other things to mention around the actual day itself. Just to think about practically. One of the things is we encourage you to kind of greet candidates if you're doing an in-person event, having someone who's just grabbing candidates when they come in, maybe having a space for them to be before the event so they can prep or talk to their aides or whatever before coming out to the conversation. And equally, if you're having an online hustings, maybe inviting politicians to join 5 or 10 minutes before, just so you can run through the order of the session. Make sure any kind of signage that you've prepared is up and is ready in advance. If you're doing anything kind of around accessibility, an audio loop or have a sign language translator or whatever it may be, just making sure that that's all up and running before the session starts. If you have invited press, we'd encourage you to kind of reserve a few seats if it's in person for the press to be, just so that they can have good seats, get good photos, report on that well. And make sure if you do have a registration system, that's kind of really obvious and clear as people walk into the venue, so you can get them signed in. And then the last thing to talk about for on the day is capturing that event and making sure you've got as much kind of resource you can have from it as possible to share with people. If you're doing an in-person event, you might want to consider recording it and having it up and live stream for people to access, kind of running as a hybrid method. If you're doing it online, we really encourage you to record the session because it's quite easy to do. And then that can be shared with people afterwards. So as many people as possible can benefit from the information shared in the session. but you also might want to record in person if you have the kind of ability to do so. Having someone who's taking photos or encouraging people to take photos and share on their social media, again, to kind of maximize the impact of the day. And then potentially, if you can't record the entire session, potentially capturing the answers from the candidates in real time, whether that's transcribing them or recording them. And so you've got evidence of what was said on the day, both for yourself and for attendees or people who weren't able to make it. If you can get press along to cover the event, we really encourage you to do so. Just a final emphasis on that there. And then the last thing to say is just if you are going to be recording, whether that's photo or video, just being really clear on that, making sure you've got consent to take photos at an in-person event or recording at an in-person event, and ways for people to opt out of being involved in that. You don't have to get permission from politicians to record them. It's kind of because they're public figures, it would kind of be seen as reasonable to expect to be recorded in a setting like this. But we would encourage you to still let them know what your plans are for recording anyway, just out of courtesy. So that's the final thing on what to do on the day. But now I will hand back to you, Cyril, to talk about following up from the hustings.
Awesome. Thank you very much, buddy. Yes, so congratulations all. You have made it through the day. You've invited your candidates, your parties came along. Some did, some didn't show up maybe. But there's still some certain levels of accountability that we need to build into the process. And this is where following up from the hustings comes into play. So there are key things that we need to do to ensure that we are we're able to have, or like we're able to build on the momentum from the hustings. So with candidates, all parties, again, given the new system, it's always crucial to send a follow-up email. In that email, you can be thanking them for attending the hustings, but also it is a way of reminding them of the commitments. Right, so it's important, again, if you've got a note taker, to be taking care, or if the transcriber to give you a list of the commitments that the candidates have made, and then again, it's a good record keeping, right, for both yourselves and also the candidates. And this is something that if they are, say, for example, elected, you can always come back on and check to see exactly where they are in terms of ensuring that they're meeting that commitment. But again, with that, we want to be using these hustings as a way of building further conversations with them. It could very well be on a climate nature issue, but also it could be another issue that affects us either personally or affects other members of our community as well. But again, it is about trying to ensure that you're building that relational approach that is built on a collaborative experience, and actually trying to ensure that there's a dialogue that continues to happen post the hustings. Now, as Alfie mentioned, with the press or the media, if you've invited them, and here we do urge again to do invite them, and think about any people who are working within the democratic space, for example, democratic journalists, and do invite them to your hustings. But do share press releases with them, or any relevant videos or photos that you would have taken on the day. And maybe here as well, just to plug, it's important, for example, if some of the parties you have invited didn't turn up, this is actually another way of building accountability within the process, because it will say, for example, it will show that this community organizes events and only 2 parties showed up instead of 5 other parties, right? And then in a way, it's able to call out the other parties that didn't attend, and will ensure that the community is aware of their missing presence, and again, we'll make sure that they're held accountable. But again, the fundamental thing here as well is to confirm plans for their reporting of the hustings, right? So with this, as I'm sure some of you are aware, when you do speak to journalists, sometimes they say this piece won't go out until next week, for example. So it's important to actually try to identify when, if they're writing any press articles, when they will be going out. Usually we say, like, if it's hot off the press, it's always good, i.e. certain party didn't turn up on a particular hosting. We want to call them out on it. We want to keep them honest. We want to keep them accountable. This could be another way of trying to identify exactly when it is that your press release will be going out. And then finally, we also have to think about the attendees and the attendees and the community as well. Do ensure that you thank all the attendees for making the time, for coming to the event, and then do ask them as well to promote the content widely, right? If they've any photos, of themselves at the event, or they want to write a testimony of the event. This is always a good thing to actually showcase to the community that we are trying to hold our politicians accountable. So do encourage people to do that, and with that as well. Coming back to the whole idea of building relationships with elected candidates, right? So, coming back to the reminder of commitments, we want to consider, you have to consider rather, how you can follow up with successful elected candidates. So we want to be converting that momentum, right, those commitments that we have had from the hustings into effective action now that they have the power and the influence of an MS, right? And again, coming back to the wide array of MSs you will have within your particular constituency, it's always good to get in there first and say, like, listen, you came to the hustings, you made this commitment to us, you're new to the job, you're energized, let's go for it, right? So it's very much important that we build and continue those relationships post the hustings, especially for the elected MSs. Now, we will be offering trainings post the, we do say have some upcoming trainings that will be focusing on the first 100 days following the election. And here again, we're trying to ensure that we're creating a space for everyone with taking part in the hustings and other community members as well that you may know. If you do know people who will be interested in this, do share this with them as well. But essentially, the whole idea of the trainings post for the first 100 days is to ensure that we're holding politicians accountable and building the momentum as well, continuing to ensure that we have the momentum moving forward. So we will stop there, and we will stop the recording. And if you do have any questions, we have dedicated this space. Rather, if you do have any questions, please get in touch with the team. And again, looking at each other, not to call you out, but if you do have like questions regarding hustings as well, Ben is your man. Ben, if you don't mind putting your email, or we can share those details. But please do get in touch if you've got any questions. I will stop the recording now if you bear with me for a second.